The cardiovascular system is actually the first system to become functional, with the primordial heart starting to appear at week 3 and beating at day 22 to 23. At this stage, the fetal heartbeat can be used to detect a viable pregnancy, and so the story of all of that starts here. And so what you're looking at here is a dorsal view of the embryo at day 20, so middle of week 3. This is cranial, this is caudal, left and right, okay? Now, at around day 19 to 20, the cells that develop the heart first appear as the cranial U-shaped heart field, located cranial to the oropharyngeal membrane. That heart field develops in a region that we call splanchnopleur, which is a combination of both endoderm and splanchnic mesoderm. And that relationship is important because via signals from the endoderm, the mesoderm will differentiate into the cardiovascular system. So mesoderm actually makes the heart tissue, but endoderm just influences its development through signaling. And that splanchnic mesoderm will form angioblastic cords, which will canalize, as in a lumen will be created to form these bilateral primitive heart tubes, which we call the endocardial heart tubes. Now, embryonic folding, our pivotal week 4 event, also plays a crucial role in developing the heart tube. So let's look at a transverse section here to see how transverse folding specifically causes these bilateral endocardial heart tubes to merge medially as a single heart tube, which we can now call the primordial heart. Fusion of the endocardial heart tubes starts on day 20 and is complete by day 22. Importantly, we can also see that the developing heart tube is initially suspended by dorsal mesocardium within this pericardial cavity. And as the heart tube develops, we can now identify multiple components. So here we have the thick external layer, the myocardium, forming from splanchnic mesoderm surrounding the endocardial tube. The innermost layer, the endocardium, forming the original endothelium of the heart tube, and a gelatinous connective tissue layer called cardiac jelly, which is essentially the extracellular matrix that will separate the myocardium and endocardium. By day 28, the dorsal mesocardium degrades, leaving a space where it used to be, referred to as the transverse pericardial sinus in the adult. And after all is said and done, we now have a heart tube that's fully enclosed within the pericardial cavity. And then to look at the contributions of longitudinal folding, let's take a longitudinal section, slicing this way. Okay, so this is cranial, caudal, ventral, and dorsal. Here we can see that after the folding of the head and the embryo, the primordial heart, along with the septum transversum and the pericardial cavity, are carried ventrally and caudally, placing the heart in the future thorax and into correct anatomical position. So pre-folding, the septum transversum is cranial to the endocardial heart tubes, and post-folding, it ends up caudal to the now fused primordial heart, okay? The story of the heart takes an interesting turn here between days 22 to 28. So the primordial heart will elongate during that time. It'll become tubular, and limited space in the pericardial cavity contributes to this alternating series of contractions and dilations, which we can see through this ventral view. So this is cranial, this is caudal, and before we talk about these blobs, it's important for you to know that the venous and arterial ends of this primordial heart are anchored in place by the septum transversum caudally and the pharyngeal arches cranially, so they're fixed in position. And indeed, we see that the aortic sac, which is the origin of the aortic arches, is continuous with the first pharyngeal arch arteries, tethering them to the rest of the heart tube. The aortic sac continues caudally as the truncus arteriosus, which later divides into the ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk, so it forms the more proximal portions of these great vessels. And the rest of the heart tube dilations, from cranial to caudal, we then have the bulbus cordis, which mostly forms the primitive right ventricle and some of our arterial outflow structures, the primitive ventricle, which forms the left ventricle, the primitive atrium, and at the base, what's not labeled here for you is the sinus venosus, this orange crescent that you see here, which are the primordial venous connections. And again, it is fixed in position by the septum transversum caudally. This is, of course, the umbilical vesicle here in yellow. Now, the ventricles, including the bulbous cordus and the primitive ventricle, these will both grow faster than the rest of the heart tube, and coupled with the fact that all this growth happens within the tight confines of the pericardial cavity, the heart tube is forced to loop into an S-shaped structure that resembles the adult heart. So this looping starts in the middle of week 4, where the heart tube undergoes a right-handed or a dextral looping is what they call it. So since this is right and this is left, right-handed looping will result in the apex or the aortic sac pointing left. It's fixed in position, right? Can't go anywhere. The cranial end of the heart will then bend slightly to the right, and the caudal end will bend slightly to the left. Okay, as a result of all this folding. And starting day 26, both the primitive atrium and the sinus venosus relocate, so they end up dorsal to the bulbous cordus and the truncus arteriosus, which are both collectively referred to as the outflow region. Now, this is quite confusing, so listen keenly as I take you through all of that from a different perspective. So same ventral view here, but looking at the heart in isolation, we see that looping results in the apex pointing left, the bulbous cordus bending to the right, and the primitive ventricle and primitive atrium bending to the left. The lateral view here on the right shows you that all of these veins drain into the sinus venosus. But what it doesn't show you that the ventral view does is how the sinus venosus and the primitive atrium relocate dorsally and cranially. Okay? Looping takes place only within 6 days, so this is what the heart looks like by day 28. And by the end of week 4, we've established continuous unidirectional blood flow. So blood first enters at the sinus venosus, then flows through the primitive atrium, through the atrioventricular canal, to the primitive ventricle. Blood will then flow through an interventricular foramen to the primitive right ventricle, then out through the outflow region consisting of, again, both the bulbous cordus and the truncus arteriosus. So what you're looking at now is a lateral view of the heart tube, looking at it from the side, so that we can see the partition that will grow between the atrium and the ventricles along the sagittal plane. By the end of week 4, atrioventricular or AV endocardial cushions form from the lining of the dorsal and the ventral walls of the AV canal, which will undergo an epithelial to mesenchymal transition. And neural crest cells also contribute to these cushions. Okay. During week 5, more and more mesenchyme populate the cushions within the cardiac jelly, the extracellular matrix, and so this will cause the cushion to proliferate and grow bidirectionally in a medial direction along the sagittal plane until they eventually fuse into one central endocardial cushion. So here I'm showing you the same thing, but this time in a ventral view. So since you're looking at it from the front, the dorsal endocardial cushion would be growing out at you, and the ventral endocardial cushion growing back into the screen. Okay, so they grow bidirectionally and they fuse medially. So this will effectively form an atrioventricular or AV septum at the midline, derived from two different cell populations, ultimately dividing the AV canal into a right and a left canal. So that was atrioventricular septum formation. Interatrial septum formation, to separate the two atria, it's a little more complicated here. So listen keenly again. We're looking here at a coronal section of the developing heart, ventral view. In parallel, you're also shown a mid-sagittal section here to the left. So looking at it from the front, this is atrium cranially, ventricle caudally, and importantly, we can see here the central endocardial cushion. The interatrial septum first starts off with a thin, flappy membrane called the septum primum. Primum for first, right? And the septum primum forms from mesoderm from the roof of the common atrium, which will grow out caudally towards the central endocardial cushion. As the membrane is formed, the opening between its free edge and the central endocardial cushion, called the ostium primum, gets smaller. This opening is important, right, because it allows blood to be shunted from the right to the left atrium, bypassing pulmonary circulation during development. But before the septum primum closes off the connection between the two atria, apoptosis of cells near the origin of the septum primum creates a second hole, which we call the ostium secundum. Okay. You can imagine how fusion of the septum primum with the endocardial cushions gets rid of this ostium primum, that shunt that we had established between the right and left atria. But when that fusion occurs, the ostium secundum takes over that role and becomes the new shunt between the two atria, so that we can keep bypassing pulmonary circulation throughout the fetal period. A second, thicker wall then starts to grow from the roof of the atria, which we call the septum secundum. The septum secundum is also crescent-shaped and develops parallel to the septum primum to its right. As it grows, it covers the ostium secundum, but it leaves behind yet another hole near the center, which we call the foramen ovale. At this point, the remnant of the septum primum immediately adjacent to the foramen ovale is called the valve of the foramen ovale. The purpose of all these holes is, again, during embryonic and fetal circulation, oxygenated blood can pass between the right and left atria through the foramen ovale, then through the ostium secundum as the valve of the foramen ovale remains open. And we refer to this tissue as a valve because after birth, after Junior takes their first breath, right, increased blood flow to the lungs will raise the pressure in the left atrium, which forces the valve of the foramen ovale to close against the septum secundum. So about 3 weeks after birth, they then fuse together, and this results in an indentation seen in the wall of the adult right atrium called the fossa ovalis. And the final result is an interatrial septum formed largely from the septum secundum, with contributions from the valve of the foramen ovale, which closes as the fossa ovalis when they fuse. At this point, we almost have the four heart chambers, so we've got separation between the atria and ventricles at the midline, even separation between the two atria. So all that's left is to partition the two ventricles. Partitioning in the primordial ventricles begins with myocytes from these tissues, which form a ridge, or an interventricular septum from the floor of the ventricle. This muscular interventricular septum then grows towards the endocardial cushion cranially, but it doesn't actually proliferate that much, okay? At a certain point, it actually stops growing, but the ventricles surrounding the septum get larger and larger as the septum itself stays stationary. So while the muscular interventricular septum continues to cover most of the space between the two ventricles, it doesn't actually partition the space completely by itself. And so the space that's left behind here is what we call the interventricular foramen. But fear not, because at the end of week 7, this interventricular foramen is fully closed by a membrane, which of course we call the membranous interventricular septum. This membrane is derived from 3 different tissue sources. It's a little complicated and involves structures that we haven't talked about yet, so we'll revisit this at the end of the video, okay, not to worry. Now for the last chapter of this story, the partitioning of the outflow region relies on neural crest cells that migrate through the primordial pharynx and pharyngeal arches to get to the heart. In this mid-sagittal section here, looking at the right side of the heart, we see the developing muscular interventricular septum, the AV septum forming from the fusion of the dorsal and ventral endocardial cushions, left ventricle, right ventricle, and the proximal and distal portions of the outflow region, okay, which again consists of the bulbus cordus and the truncus arteriosus. Those migrating neural crest cells will form ridges to start partitioning the outflow region into the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. Ridges that form in the bulbus cordus are called bulbar ridges, located in the proximal outflow tract. Ridges that form in the truncus arteriosus are called truncal ridges, located in the distal outflow tract. Collectively, they're both referred to as the conotruncal ridges. Okay. Don't let the colors here throw you off. They're just there to illustrate the corkscrew pattern that these conotruncal ridges grow into. So in cross-section at various levels, we indeed see that the truncal and bulbar ridges spiral on each other within the lumen. and ultimately they fuse, resulting in the formation of the aorticopulmonary septum, separating two arterial channels, the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. The spiral formation of the septum during development is precisely why in the adult, the pulmonary trunk orients itself spirally around the aorta. Lastly, we can also see from this animation that the membranous interventricular septum, which closes off the interventricular foramen left behind by the muscular interventricular septum, is formed from three different tissue sources: the left bulbar ridge, the right bulbar ridge, and the central endocardial cushion.